From students returning to the classroom to vaccinations for teachers to the fetal heartbeat bill, I speak exclusively with State Representative Kambrell Garvin of Richland County for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. State Representative Kambrell Garvin, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on today, Quintin.
Oh, you're very welcome. Obviously, you are fighting the good fight of faith, according to your Twitter page. You are Mo's hubby, Ren's daddy, a state representative, progressive, former educator and organizer, and a believer. Who else is Kambrell Garvin these days?
That's a great question. So I think my Twitter bio sums it up really well. I try to, encapsulate so much there, but really somebody who just wants to make a difference. Somebody who started working in the community at a very early age. I organized my first voter registration campaign at 10 years old as a member of the local NAACP. And I went on to college and continued to advocate for issues that I believed in. And oftentimes when I talk to people, they say, well, Kambrell, you kind of came out of the middle of nowhere and now you're really making an impact. And what I tell people is that I've been in this fight for a long time. Before I ever got elected or put my name on the ballot, I've been fighting for causes that I believe in. And so I think at the end of the day, I want folks to realize that I'm somebody that's just working to make my community a little bit better and the world a little bit better from my having been here. There's a poem called God's Minute by Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays.
Right.
And it says that we only have 60 seconds. And basically summarizing that poem is what we put into our lives and how we utilize our 60 seconds will matter the most.
Yes, sir. And let me ask you about this, because what fight are you fighting right now when it comes to District 77?
Certainly. So District 77 is an interesting place. We have some middle-class earners that are doing really, really well, but we also have some portions of the district that have grown older, that are impoverished. And so I really, when I go and drive around my district, I'm looking at certain things like, is it a food desert? Do my constituents have access to fresh fruits and vegetables? I'm looking at things such as healthcare. Some of the bills that I propose concern the expansion of Medicaid in our state. And that's an act that our General Assembly has refused to do for the past, let's say, 11 to 12 years since the passing of the Affordable Care Act by President Obama. When we look at the COVID-19 pandemic, I think what it has underscored is that there are huge disparities between communities of color and other communities in our state. Health disparities, economic disparities, and this COVID-19 contagion has just further showed that glaring gap between the haves and the have-nots. So as my bio says, I'm fighting the good fight. So whether it be healthcare, whether it be access to quality education for all students in our state, those are some of the other battles that we're waging at the State House.
How do you close the gap in 2021?
Yeah, that's a great question. So historically, African Americans are centuries behind our counterparts. Generational, like in regards to generational wealth, in regards to, just so many different facets. So we're playing catch up. So the question is, that's a great question. How do you close that gap? And I think education is one of the great equalizers. However, let me put a caveat in that. When you have Black and brown kids that are going to college and amassing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt, that's not an equalizer because mama and daddy can't afford to pay for school. And so I think we have to look at the systems that are in place. And I think let's talk about student loans. That's one factor that I think is crippling an entire generation of folks that are coming up. Because if your student loans get behind, then you can't buy a house. That's factored into your debt to income ratio. So all of these things are systemic. And so closing the gap, I think that we first have to acknowledge that there is a gap because there are so many people that believe that we have moved and that we've made, that we're so far removed from some of the things in the past, whether that be legalized segregation under the Jim Crow era or legalized slavery. We are not that that far removed. I saw a meme on social media a few days ago that had a picture of Ruby Bridges, the little girl who integrated the school, and there's that historic photo of her being surrounded by the 4 or 5 white officers, marshals, federal marshals, walking her in. Ruby Bridges is still alive, not even 70 years old yet. So when people say that get over it, when people say stop talking about issues of systemic racism, I oftentimes remind them that yes, we've made progress, and I'm going to be very clear about that, but there is still more work to be done.
Now, what other systems are really harming this generation?
So obviously student loan debt is certainly one. I think when we look at the environment that we're in politically, I think that we also have to acknowledge the fact that we are at a reckoning point. I think this past summer of 2020, we saw the George Floyd protests, and the Black Lives Matter movement really became a national movement. So I would definitely point out the fact that that I think we are finally coming to a point where we're acknowledging, again, some of the historic problems. And I think we need to address policing in our communities. I think that we need to, there are so many issues. I'm working on some legislation right now that deals with the Black maternal mortality rate. So I'll be 30 this year. I'll be 30 in October. And Black women are far more likely to die in child labor than any other demographic of women. So there are so many systemic issues that we're trying to get to the root of, and we could probably talk all day about them.
Oh, yes, sir. And sorry about the delay there, but let me jump right into, because I know you have a hard stop at 11:30, but let me go to this. Governor McMaster said Thursday that, quote, schools can safely reopen now without making our seniors compete with younger, less vulnerable South Carolinians for vaccines. He also says this, quote, I have called in the General Assembly to send me a bill requiring every district to provide parents and students with an option for 5-day in-person instruction. He says, I'm still waiting. Let me ask you this, State Representative, how will the General Assembly put before Governor McMaster a bill that authorized DHEC to vaccinate all teachers, staff, and school personnel immediately?
Well, great question, Quintin. So as a former educator, I spent 3 years as a 6th grade science teacher in Colleton County, South Carolina. So I know firsthand the challenges that our educators are facing. Number one, they're teaching in unparalleled times, trying to move from being in person to being all virtual. Now, you're absolutely, the governor's right. Kids do need to get back to school, because I am personally worried that kids are falling behind academically, and that the gap between rural communities and urban areas and kids that live in districts and communities that have an abundance of money, I believe that there is going to be some disparities there. So, but however, with that being said, we must also be realistic about it. If we send our kids back to school prematurely, there could certainly be an outbreak of COVID-19. So I think teachers should be vaccinated early if we want to send our kids back. And until teachers get vaccinated, those who so desire, I don't think that we should be forcing anybody to go back to 5 days of face-to-face instruction until the vaccine becomes readily available.
And I might be asking a couple of redundant questions, but let me go to it. How will the state make sure that all students and communities also meet the requirements of the CDC necessary for schools to open without vaccinating teachers?
Well, that's a great question. So I think the Superintendent of Education has outlined some guidelines, and there's also been some money given by the General Assembly for safety materials in the classroom, screens, and that sort of thing, cleaning supplies. But it is a concern. I'm just going to be honest with you. Teachers already have to do so much. They have to be referees between kids. They had to teach. They had to be the counselors when kids were upset. Now they also have to go in and they have to, clean up and be the custodial staff as well between classes. So there are just so many challenges that we face. And I think that if we're being honest about it, this is an ongoing process. But I want your listeners to know that I am very concerned that until our teachers are vaccinated, that it won't be safe for everybody to go back to school. But I would love to see it.
And I know that the state has roughly 48,000 teachers, if I'm not mistaken. How will the vaccine supply be replenished in less than 5 days?
So that's a great question. And when we talk about those particular details, I think that I would have to defer to DHEC and I would have to defer to places like Prisma Health, who have the more detailed data distribution plans. I know that just this week alone here in Richland County, we saw an issue where Prisma opened it up to those 65 and older, not just the 70-year-olds, and they were immediately, there was such a rush, they were immediately out of the vaccine. President Biden has assured us that the vaccine will become readily available by this summer, where any American can take it. I take President Biden at his word on that promise, and I do believe that he will deliver. So right now, yes, we are in the early days of vaccine distribution. As you recall, we're still transitioning from one administration to another, and just putting a pin in that. That transition was delayed by the former president's, denial about the election outcome. So I think that also has an impact on what's happening. But with all of that being said, I believe the vaccine will become readily available, and it will become readily available soon for all South Carolinians.
How many doses of vaccine is the state currently sitting on?
That, you know what? Again, that specific question would have to go to DHEC, and oftentimes in the governor's office, who oversees DHEC, would be able to answer that specific question in more detail.
What parts of doses should go to rural areas?
Well, you know what? I think we should certainly consider the populations in those communities, and I think it should be equally distributed. So I represent a predominantly urban area. I would say about 90% of my district is urban, but there is that 10%. So I am sympathetic to those issues. I don't think the focus should entirely be on the big cities of Columbia, Charleston, or Greenville. I think that we also have to hit Orangeburg and Hollywood and Santee and everywhere in between.
Yes, sir. And let me ask you this too. Why isn't there any mobile vaccination units for services in the rural areas?
Again, we point back to DHEC. I know that the General Assembly has allocated some funding for that.
Okay.
And so as I understand it, that's coming. Now, the question should be, why wasn't that planned for initially? I think that's a great question, but there is money coming for that to happen. I know we talked about there are some current mobile units that we had in place previously, and the conversation is kind of centered around maybe trying to put those back out, in the meantime to start vaccinating citizens. But what I will say, and I want your listeners to know, that those mechanisms and those things are coming.
Hypothetically, can the state get teachers and staff vaccinated in 2 weeks and then move to the 65 plus group?
Well, I think it has to happen simultaneously. So I just don't want to focus on, solely vaccinating teachers and then putting them above folks that are 65 and older, who, in all honesty, if somebody in that age group were to catch COVID-19, they may have a harder time surviving versus a 21-year-old teacher. I had COVID. I was probably in one of those first waves of COVID, and I was relatively healthy, thank God for that, and young, and so I was able to bounce back. I have seen people my age pass from it. So obviously, any of us can die from it, but I don't think that we should just say, hey, let's give all the teachers vaccines, or let's just put all our emphasis, it has to happen simultaneously. I think that we can walk and chew chewing gum at the same time.
And I know this might be a DHEC question, State Representative Garvin, but why aren't disabled adults under 65 not obviously eligible yet for the vaccine?
Mm-hmm. And it is, so it is a DHEC question, and I think that you raise a really great point. There are so many people that I think, especially those who have pre-existing conditions that are under that 65 age limit, that really need to be seen. So I think when you start picking and choosing, and this is just me opining, I think when you start picking and choosing winners, it does get tricky. But I do believe that that the vaccine will become readily available in the interim and in the very near future.
How does the House address all the students who are going to unfortunately fail this year because of inadequate instruction?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So absolutely. As I mentioned previously, I'm a former educator. And so face-to-face is not for everybody, especially in rural communities where broadband is an issue. If kids don't have access to computers or to internet, it makes it more difficult to learn. I think that the General Assembly and the State Department of Education, I think that we all have to look very closely at what's happening within our state. And I think that our districts are doing the very best that they can to make sure that all of our kids are being educated. And so I have yet to see the final numbers or even a progress report of where we are in regards to kids passing or failing yet. But it is an issue of concern, and I think that's why so many of our state leaders are pushing for us to get back to school. But the caveat should be that we get back to school safely to ensure that our kids are not falling behind. But it is a real issue, Quintin.
The fetal heartbeat bill. The South Carolina Senate passed the fetal heartbeat bill, that is, which now obviously heads to the South Carolina House for passage. And Governor McMaster is obviously eager to sign this bill into law once it passes both chambers. Obviously, you have obviously a lot of experience in law. Is this considered an unconstitutional impediment under the Roe versus Wade?
Absolutely. There's no question about the fact that this fetal heartbeat bill that has passed the Senate and that's headed to the House and will most likely pass in the House, it is an unconstitutional act. And I think that, and there's no question that the courts will not strike it down. Elections have consequences. And what I mean by that is just this past November 2020, we lost 3 state senators who lost their seats in what were pretty conservative, had become pretty conservative areas where President Trump had won in 2016. And these senators were able to manage. However, they weren't able to overcome just this red wave that hit the state last November. So with that being said, the Senate has been able to stop bad legislation in the past. Now that their numbers are now lower, now the Republican Party has has or is very close to having a super majority, but they can pretty much do whatever they want to do. And as Democrats, we have a couple of tools in our arsenal, but they aren't enough to stop bad legislation. To say that a woman is not able to have an abortion past 6 weeks is certainly an infringement of her rights. Let me say this right here. There are people who say that they are pro-choice. I argue that they're pro-birth in the sense that they want to encourage people and force folks to have babies. However, what are they doing once these kids arrive? Are they, especially to parents that may not have the economic need for them? Are they providing some sort of assistance, or are they turning their back and telling these parents to deal with it on their own? It's quite ironic to me, Quintin, that we as a legislator want to tell a woman what she can and can't do with her body at 6 weeks, where she may not know that she's pregnant. But I have colleagues that absolutely refuse to wear something as simple as a face mask in the State House, where you have 170 members, so 124 in the House, 46 in the Senate, plus another 50 or 60 staffers, all in what could be a super spreader event. I have colleagues that refuse to wear masks because they say, you can't tell me what to do, government. But these are the same people that are telling a woman what she can and can't do with her body. I think it's the height of hypocrisy, and they need to be called on it.
Let me ask you this, Dan. If they want to reverse the vaccinated, obviously, should they alert the local sheriff?
If they want to, I'm sorry, what was the question? If they want to?
Yeah, if they want to reverse the vaccinated, that is, should they alert the local sheriff?
I'm not sure the vaccine. I'm not sure what that. I'm not sure what you're referencing. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. Let me ask this in another way. If abortion is legal, why does anybody have to be informed?
Gotcha. I see. So abortions are legal. So under Roe v. Wade, the U.S. Supreme Court pretty much said that a woman has a legal right to obtain an abortion. Okay. What was happening before Quintin? Before they legalized abortions were taking place, but they weren't happening in a safe facility. Women were going to back alleys. They were going to somebody's living room couch. They were going to places that were not sterilized. And oftentimes these women were left to die, trying to have an abortion. What Roe did is it legalized it, and it made it a safe thing for a woman to be able to do. And so I guess the answer to your question would be, I don't think that the law that they're pushing through, and I think that's what you're referencing, it is not constitutional. It will not hold muster in the court, but it's all politics. It's all the Republican Party trying to appease their base and not dealing in reality.
Has South Carolina already limited abortion to like free pregnancy exemptions or exceptions?
Yeah, so the state has taken several acts over the years. They have teetered on the border of what is and what isn't acceptable. So the courts over the years have looked at different rulings. They've looked at different decisions, and they've said, this is okay or this isn't okay. But the courts draw a very strong line on certain things, and I think that our state 6-week abortion bill will be one of those barriers that the U.S. Supreme Court will not allow. But what's happening, to be honest with you, is President Trump appointed 3 new conservative jurors to the Supreme Court: Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. And what you have now is you have state Republican-controlled conservative legislators all throughout the U.S., and particularly throughout the South, that are now trying to send up controversial pieces of legislation in hopes that it will overturn Roe v. Wade. And so I just think that your listeners should certainly be aware of what's happening.
Yes, sir. And let me move forward to another question, the economy. With the COVID situation affecting the state economy so badly, how has it affected tax revenues in your district that obviously you need for to fund transportation and other projects?
Well, let me speak from a broader standpoint. So South Carolina going into COVID-19, we had a budget surplus. Yes. South Carolina we weren't in bad shape. COVID-19 has really kind of rocked the foundation of all of that. The budget process is still ongoing, and we're still operating under the previous year's fiscal budget. The Ways and Means Committee is still going through the numbers now to kind of get an idea of where we will be. But what I will say is that I am certain that there will be consequences as a result of the state having to take additional steps in dealing with COVID-19.
And I know you just mentioned this just obviously a few seconds ago, but the General Assembly delayed finishing the 2021 budget last spring after COVID started spreading, saying the virus was causing too much uncertainty to lock in stepping all the way to June 2021. Instead, they agreed to keep the spending at the levels in the 2019-2020 budget and revisit the situation at a special session later on. We are in February right now. What are those levels?
So I don't have this. I don't have the specifics, and I wish that I knew that question was coming because I would have loved to have provided that. But what we're doing now, Quintin, is we are reviewing the budget. The Ways and Means Committee is reviewing the budget, the working of the budget, and we will hopefully have budget books. We get budget books about this thick annually, and if you're doing your job, then you'll go through that budget and you'll read it and you'll figure out what's in there. But we have not gotten that yet. So, and I don't sit on the Ways and Means Committee, so unfortunately, I don't have the most up-to-date current forecast for you. But what I will say is that those numbers are coming, and it will be interesting to see what sort of a position we're in as a state.
Hey, let me give us some good news. Obviously, we are celebrating you because you're a father and you have a baby, and we love that. How has your life changed? Certainly.
So I shared with my colleagues in the House earlier this week that my wife and I met in college, met in 2010. She was a freshman, I was a sophomore, and we spent pretty much our entire collegiate career dating. And I graduated in 2013 from Winthrop University, went down to Colleton County, taught school for 3 years, and she and I got married in 2015 and came back home to Columbia in 2016, went to USC Law School. I did, and my wife went to USC for the graduate program and got 2 master's degrees. And we both graduated in 2019. Long story short, we finally decided it was time to have a baby. We were finally ready and for that next step. So being a father has been a beautiful thing. I was sharing with a colleague a few days ago that, I don't mind getting up at night anymore. I don't mind waking up early in the mornings. I don't mind all of the small things that come with parenthood, changing diapers. It's certainly a beautiful thing. And, it kind of makes me even appreciate, sacrifices that my mother made. I was raised by a single mother, and it makes me appreciate, how she, sacrificed and how she always put her kids above herself. And, and that's my same attitude with my daughter. I want her life And I think every generation has a responsibility to do a little bit more. So I'm able to stand on my mother's shoulders, and I want her to be able to stand on my shoulders and go even further than I did. So it's a big thing.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, State Representative Kambrell Garvin, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you so much, Quintin. And I really appreciate all that you do for your community and our state. And thank you so much for having me on.
Well, you're welcome anytime.